right, I think we're ready to do this. So, happy Friday, everybody. Hope everyone is hanging out at home, relaxing, not worrying about the COVID virus too much. I'm really excited to start doing these live streams. I just decided, since all of us are going to be working from home for the foreseeable future, that I thought it'd be fun to maybe have a little Friday lunchtime activity for people to learn a little bit about machine learning, play with some things, and ultimately make some cool stuff. So what I'm going to do here is, before I forget, check the show notes. There's a bunch of things in the description. If you want to check out the slides that are available, there's a bunch of other links to my work, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the near future. In the meantime, let's get started. Also, I should tell you right now, you're going to hear my cat. She's probably going to jump on me at some point during this. That's part of making it live. It's going to be fun. Just say hi to Bug when you see her. Here she comes. Okay. So I'm really excited. Like I said, I'm really excited to have everybody here. I'm hoping that people can just learn to do some machine learning stuff. Please, if you make stuff after checking out this live stream, please share it with me. All my social links are in the description for this video. And let's get started. So I think today, since this is the first live stream I'm doing, it's going to be pretty straightforward. I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am, just so you know a little bit about what I do. And then I'm also going to give you a really brief introduction to Colab and a really brief introduction to machine learning. Since I don't know what everybody knows about machine learning, I want to give you a 5-minute overview, just so that way you have the basics down. And then I think we're going to spend the majority of today looking over what's called style transfer. So style transfer was pretty popular a year or two ago. It's kind of fallen out of favor, but I think there's still some really cool stuff there. So I'm going to show you how to do that, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end. I think this live stream will last about 45 minutes. I have a 1 o'clock meeting that I have to go back to work for, so let's see how it goes. I'm going to just quickly check the chat, make sure that everyone can hear me, make sure nothing else is going on. Let me just see here real quick. Yeah, I have a hungry little cat. She's not even hungry. She just wants to hang out with me. But yeah, she loves to add in her voice. I'm just going to grab her and bring her up, because this is going to be how this works. Come on. You're the co-host now. Everybody say hi to Bug. There's a Bug. Okay. All right, cool. So let's get started. So just a little bit about me. My name is Derek Schultz. I'm a designer and artist. I've spent about maybe the past year really digging into machine learning, art, and making things. I learned from a lot of other folks that you probably know about: Gene Kogan, Mario Klingemann, Helena Sarin, watching all their work, and I got really excited. I want to start to make my own. These are some things that I make. I do a lot of work in various different libraries and different mediums, but all of my artwork is image-based or video-based. I don't do a lot of stuff with text or audio. There's probably other great folks out there if you're interested in that particular thing. I work a lot with sort of natural imagery and making it feel unnatural through machine learning, whether that's combining different materials, doing work in Photoshop afterward, those sort of things. I also do illustration commissions. This is an illustration I did for the Baffler. This uses style transfer and some other Photoshop things, but I sort of have built machine learning into my process. And I think that's really important for all of us who are artists, designers. Machine learning shouldn't just be the end-all be-all of what you make. Build it into your process, and your process will be different than mine. And my hope is that you'll learn a little bit of this so you can add into your own process. This is another piece I did for Baffler, but again, this was combining machine learning imagery into traditional illustration work. And then since about July of this year, I've been teaching classes at a place called sshh. Thanks, that was cool. I've been teaching classes at a place called sshh in New York, and then also doing some remote classes that I'm titling Artificial Images. These are classes that are available to anyone. You can sign up for them. They're about a 4 or 5 week class, and we go through different libraries. You learn how to make data sets, which we'll talk a little bit more about, and then you'll learn different things. So I think what'll happen is this live stream will mostly be focused on using Colab, which is free, and then if you ever want to sign up for one of my classes, you'll learn about some of the other tools that are out there, things that cost money, and you'll sort of dig in deeper into like how to actually like make a lot of different pieces using machine learning. If you want to sign up to learn more about those courses, you can either follow me on my social networks, or there's a link to a newsletter you can sign up for. So with that, I'm going to jump into just the basics of machine learning. So again, I don't know how much everyone knows about machine learning, and I really want to spend most of the day today talking about how to do like sort of like how to actually make some stuff. So I want to just talk really high level about machine learning is. My number one theory is that the best way to learn how to do machine learning is by actually doing it. So my hope is that after this demo, you'll be able to like sort of start making stuff yourself, and you'll fail a lot and you will learn a lot that way, and that's how you should be learning. But it helps if you have like a very high level understanding of just what's going on behind the scenes. So the three things I want you to know about machine learning, just from a very basic standpoint, are data sets, training, and testing. And when I talk about testing, that is essentially what most of us would think about making images, making video. That's what machine learning data scientists call testing. So data sets. You might think about a data set as something where it's like my personal data, right? Facebook owns a huge collection of my data. It is my name, every video I've liked, every like post I've commented on, those sort of things. Now that's just like one piece of a data set. To most companies or even machine learning folks, like we actually think about collections of data sets. So like your data plus 1,000 other people's data has been anonymized, and we combine it all together, and that's what we use as a data set. And when I talk about machine learning art, a data set is basically a collection of images, or a collection of audio files, or a collection of text, but it's essentially a collection, and that collection size matters a lot. So you hear about people talking about big data, that sort of thing. Big data is applied to machine learning art would be like, how do I collect 10,000 images of a similar category? Or how do I collect 10,000 samples of poetry? And 10,000 is like, at the high end, you can do stuff with 200 images, you can do stuff with 500 images, you can do stuff with 1,000 images. But essentially, when I talk about data systems, I'm in a big collection of something. And it usually is something that we're trying to train or work with. So let's jump into training. Training is essentially a process where you take your data set, in our case it's going to be a lot of images, and you put it through a neural network, and there's a lot of descriptions about neural networks. You don't need to worry too much about it. It's sort of a magic black box as far as we're concerned, but you put that in through there, and what you get out of it is a model. And a model is important because a model is sort of a mathematic interpretation. Machine learning is basically math all behind the scenes. Like, don't let anyone tell you it's anything more complicated than that. It is really just math. And what these models are is they're a generalization of your data set. And whatever the neural network is in the middle here is actually what we're trying to like build or like trying to work with. And this is where a lot of the secret sauce is with like picking the right library or picking the right model to work with. But essentially the training process needs to create a model. Training can usually take a lot of time. It can take anywhere from hours to weeks, to probably even months, depending on what you're actually training. With Colab, we won't do a lot of training. We'll do a little bit of it in maybe future lessons, but for this we won't. But anyway, the idea is that you take your data set and you create a model from your data set. And then when we're testing and we're producing images or video or whatever we want to get out of the model, for testing what we need to do is we need to take an input. That input is usually an image, but sometimes it's something like mathematics. You'll hear people talk about vectors, latent vectors. That's a input that is a mathematic representation. Sometimes you need more than one image. So today in style transfer, we're actually going to look at using inputs of multiple images. You then put that through the model, and then what you get out of it is usually an image or a video or something else. So it's really important to know that when you're testing, you have inputs and you have outputs, and you have your model. And all three of these things are something that are required when you're making machine learning. Okay, so now that you know exactly how machine learning works and you're a machine learning expert, let's talk about Colab. So Colab is a tool from Google. We released it maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, and it's now sort of reaching a stability, and it's pretty easy to use. It is based on Jupyter Notebooks. I don't expect anyone to be familiar with what that means, but it's essentially it's a thing that's been around for a while. It's big with the data science crowd. I'll talk a little bit about why that's helpful for us. So it's based on Jupyter Notebooks. And the most important thing for us and for this live stream is that it's free. Anyone can use it. And you don't need to know how to write code. You do need to know maybe how to read code. And maybe part of this session will be about how to read a little bit and how to like alter some lines of code so you can make things work. So this is not like a GUI like say Runway ML or something. This does require a little bit of tech knowledge, but if you follow the steps that I'll walk you through today, you should be able to do stuff by yourself, and it might just take a little bit of time to sort of slowly get it worked up. Get it worked up to a place where you feel comfortable doing this. Okay, so the positives of Colab are that it's free. I'm going to keep saying that probably over and over again today. Because these are based on Jupyter Notebooks, one of the great things is that they are text and code. So we'll look at an example in a minute, but basically what it does is it allows you to read some things, read a piece of text, understand what you're doing, and then right below it will be a line of code, and you can run that code separately from other lines of code in other places. So it's a nice way to sort of learn a little bit about how machine learning works and how code works and those sort of things, while also like you can actually build in a tutorial alongside of it. So it's pretty nice in that regard, and that's what we're going to do today, and I hope you'll find it helpful. The other nice thing about Colab is most Jupyter Notebooks run on sort of like individual servers, and you won't generally find the code shared anywhere. Colab is nice in that because it's Google, it's all web URLs. I will say it's sometimes hard to find other people's Colabs. I'll show you a link that I've started to generate of a bunch of Colab notebooks that you can play with. But this is generally like how people go about sharing things, and then you can basically make duplicates of people's notebooks and do your own work in them. The downsides of Colab are that there are time limits. This will be the number one downside of Colab. Numbers vary. It's sort of based on usage and other things, but I would say in general you've got about between 8 to 10 hours to use Colab. Basically, if you leave it not running, if you basically leave a Colab notebook open and you're not running a function within it, it'll shut off after 15 or 30 minutes. But if you are running something, you have a limit about 8 hours. And most of the stuff I'll show in this section or in this session, like in these live streams, won't take all 8 hours because obviously I've got about 45 minutes to show you stuff. But it will take a little bit of time. So keep that in mind, that you do have a time limit, and if you walk away and your machine shuts off, you will lose some work. So we'll talk about that too. There are GPU and CPU limits. If you don't know what that means, that's fine, but it is to say that it's a little bit slower than using some other tools, but again, it's free, so that's kind of the balance. And you can't really do some really hardcore stuff with it. You might be able to do some style GAN work with it, which is one of the more famous models and does require a lot of GPU, but it can sometimes be tricky. And the last negative I will give it is it's Google. You can take from that what you will. Google is obviously probably looking at what you're doing. I don't think they probably care as much about what you're doing about making art, but they might be. So if you are particularly a privacy person, this might not be the best for you, but it is something to be aware of. Again, haven't mentioned yet that Colab is free. So all of these caveats is that this is a free tool. Most other machine learning tools will definitely cost you money in one way or another. It does require a Google account, so you do have to have some form of Google account, whether you've created a dummy anonymous one or whether you have one through work. It does require a Google account. Let me see what else. There is a Colab Pro plan that is $10 a month that gets you a little bit more CPU time and a little bit of a longer runtime, but I would say it's not much. So I would say if you are getting into Colab and you really like it and you want to have longer training times, other things, you might consider that, but I would say for the moment it's probably not worth other folks just buying off the shelf. So I talked a little bit about that I have a list of Colab notebooks here. I'm just going to pull this up and we can look at it really quickly. And the URL for this is in this deck, and the deck is actually shared through the live stream as well. And also I will post this in the description as well once we're done here. So Colab notebooks, there are a number here. I don't necessarily expect you to know what any of these words mean. The one we'll be working with today is this one here, NeuralStyle TF. I wrote it, that way I can talk about it. But there are a bunch of different tools here, and if you are into text generation or an audio generation, there are some notebooks here as well you can play with. Some things I'll point out here that I think might be interesting for people to play with. Our model is called super resolutions. Super resolution is basically like in Photoshop where you make an image bigger, and in Photoshop it usually gets really fuzzy. There are machine learning networks that have learned to make images larger while not necessarily making them fuzzier. I wouldn't say the quality is that much better, but it is better than Photoshop, so that's an interesting thing to look at. StyleGAN is probably the most popular library right now. There's also a lot of people making notebooks for them, so this is just a short handful of things that I think are interesting and worth playing with. What else is here? Deoldify is a really interesting tool. It converts black and white images to color. So if you've got old black and white photos, you might be interested in things like that. In general, I would say like it's probably worth clicking around and just sort of seeing what these things are, but you never know. Hopefully if this live stream works well, like my plan is to like go through a bunch of these and sort of show you different ones. So if there's something you've seen that you know is machine learning and you're interested in learning about it, drop me a note either in the chat, or I have a Slack channel that's also linked to from the descriptions, and hopefully I can like maybe learn a little bit more about it and sort of show how it works in a next live session. Okay, I believe our next step is to actually do some demo work. Before I do that, I'm just going to quickly jump into the chat, take a look at if there's any questions, any thoughts. My cat's name is Bug. Are there any prerequisites? Not really. I think, like I said, like you don't need to know how to code, but you have to be a little bit more comfortable just to get started. So, you know, your level of comfort with looking at code might be different, and we'll walk through some of that, and we'll see how that goes. And then I guess lastly, what do we have here? The IBM Watsons. Oh, interesting. Okay, so you could do some stuff with IBM Watson. I haven't played with that too much. I don't know what the difference is with that. Nancy had a question here of 10 hours free per day. Actually, it's free basically 24/7. The problem is that your machine will get shut off after 8 hours and you have to restart it. And that's basically so they try to make sure people are not doing long training sessions on it. And I've seen a lot of people that are hacking around things. So for example, StyleGAN happens to be the most popular library, and to do training on StyleGAN usually takes a couple days. So as an example, you can't really train on Colab because your machine will shut off every 8 hours. And I have seen some people who are going through the arduous task of letting it train for 8 hours, stopping it, restarting it, retraining it for another 8 hours, starting, stopping, doing that over and over again. That's a thing that's possible. I probably won't show you how to do that in this session or in any of these sessions because it is very painful. I have some videos on doing StyleGAN training if you are willing to spend some money, either through Runway ML or using Paperspace, which is a server system that I use. So I should mention all of my classes get recorded. They're all in my in my YouTube channel, and you can find a ton of resources in there. And if you have questions about anything specific outside of what I teach today, I also have a Slack channel, so you can jump in there and ask some questions if you have anything you want to look at. With that, I think it's time to finally demo. So let's talk a little bit about what style transfer is. So style transfer is essentially the process of taking a style image. Basically, we like the style of this image. I think I found it on Pinterest. We like the textures of it. We like the colors of it, those sort of things. And applying it to a content image. So here's a content image. I made this in Photoshop. I took an old illustration, used some tools to make this like sort of wallpaper pattern. And style transfer is the combination of a style image and a content image, and you get a style transfer. So you'll see here what happened is some of these textures from this black and white became the leaf textures. Some of the colors from these 3D objects became sort of the leaf textures. Basically, it's a way of applying texture and color to another image. And we're going to look at, so one thing I should also say is that, so I talked a little bit about training versus testing. Style transfers are often using pre-trained models, which means they've already been trained for you. And that means you won't need to do any training, which is great because that's basically what Colab is set up for. Colab is set up to like help us just do some testing and making of things. So this process, the process of creating an image to a texture to an image will take anywhere from a minute to 10 minutes. The smaller the image and the lower the iterations, which I'll talk about in a minute, those things take time. So if you're making a small image, like say 256, it'll happen relatively quickly. If you're making a large image, say 1400 pixels tall, that's going to take some time. So it basically goes through this process, but it still only takes about 10 minutes at most. Everything I'm going to do for this demo is going to be small, so that way like we do it quickly. But it is worth knowing that like these things do take a little bit of time, but not on the level of hours. Okay, so I'm going to open up the Colab link in a second. Also, if you're interested, there is a video that I produced for one of my classes that is about 30 minutes, and it explains everything about how style transfer works. I shouldn't say everything. It explains much about how style transfer works, as well as some other features. But I think we're ready to go. Let me just quick, yeah, so we're ready to go. Let's just go ahead and open this. So when you open a Colab link, the first thing you'll see is that it opens up in Google. They'll probably ask you to sign in or pick a certain account. I happen to have multiple Google accounts because of my job and other things. I think this will actually load in. Yeah, so I have a Colab Pro account. Like I said, I don't know that it's really that much better for y'all, but worth looking into. One thing you will notice is that when you open a Colab notebook for the very first time, you can't edit anything. Or you can click in here, but it won't let you edit it. And that is on purpose. That is basically to save, like if I make a Colab notebook, you can't be editing my notebook. So there's two things you can do here. The first is that you can open this in playground mode, which I think is what we'll do. Or you can come over here and save a copy in Drive, and this will make a copy of your own notebook. And then you can edit it, save it, share it with other folks, that sort of thing. Before I get started, let me just walk through the interface of how Colab works. So you'll see here that there are chunks of text. There are things that look like code. These gray cells are code. And you'll see that you can collapse these headlines. This is very Google-like, where you can collapse some sections. You can read through things. So in general, what I would do is maybe the first time you find a Colab notebook, if you've never used it yourself, you'll come and you will actually just sort of read through things. So with style transfer, I talked about this a little bit. Style transfer is the process of applying one texture, the style image, to the content of another image. Maybe read through everything before running it. Just see how it goes. You'll also see that in a lot of cases there's a lot of like gibberish text here, like outputs from notebooks. This is essentially like what happens here is this is what the server responded with or spit out when I ran one of these lines of code. A lot of times you're not going to need to worry about this. And actually the first time you come here, you will definitely, this won't mean anything to you and you can just ignore it. So a lot of people will come in here and be like, do I have to read all this? And you don't have to read all this. Don't read all this. It's not worth your time. You can skip this. The only thing to worry about are the gray cells. The gray cells are the code that you're actually going to run. And at least in my notebooks, I try to be pretty clear about like what we're actually going to edit, what we're going to change, those sort of things. So if you go through here, you can see you can also show images, although I personally don't do this process much. We'll talk about that in a minute. So you might read through the entire notebook, read all the text, sort of get a sense of what you're doing, and then you're going to want to come back up and actually start. Another thing to know is that at the left-hand side here, you might open Colab and it might look like this. At the left-hand side here are a couple of things you're going to want. One is the table of contents. This is helpful if you want to jump to a certain section, if you want to just get an understanding of sort of what you're looking at. The second is code snippets. You probably won't need to use those, so you can ignore those. And the last thing is the files. This is going to be a file browser. This is going to be helpful for us to upload our own images to play with, download things, that sort of thing. This is going to be a helpful piece, and this is usually what I leave open. Okay, so let's get started. So let's open this in playground mode. And now you'll see that I can double click into these and I can now edit these sections. So I could come in here, I could edit this text, I could also click into these code sections and I could start editing this. So I could say here, this is now editable. Now it's worth remembering this is in playground mode, which means I can't save my changes. If you do that other method, which is create a copy, you can save your changes. And you save them to your own drive or whatever it is. Okay, so the next thing you need to do is you want to go to runtime and you want to go to change runtime type, and you want to make sure that you are set to Python 3. That's the coding language we're going to use, and very likely yours will be set to none here. And you want to make sure this is set to GPU. If you don't set to GPU, your thing is going to run really, really slowly or might not work at all. So make sure this is set to GPU. If you don't have Colab Pro, you won't see this. It doesn't matter. It's just so you get a little bit faster RAM. I'm going to turn this on so hopefully our session runs a little bit quicker. We'll see. Okay, so I'm going to hit save. Make sure that over here you hit connect. This is going to connect you to a server. Basically, if you're not connected to a server, you can't generate anything. So this is now connected. You'll see you get a nice little green check mark here to let you know you're ready to go. Okay, so the way that this process works is that you'll generally want to read through these pieces and just sort of understand what you're doing. So first off, we need to set up our runtime. Basically, because of this library, I need to make sure that I run this. In general, I'll tell you if you need to like check things or other things. This you just run once. So there's two ways to run a code cell. First is you can click on the play button. The second, which is more likely what I will do, is you can hit Shift Return, and it'll start to run. This will give you a or like a warning message the very first time, and you just hit Run anyway. You'll see your process is now spinning a little bit here, which is great. That means it's running. I'm going to click over here to my files, and you'll see now I have sample data and a folder up. That's fine. Next thing I need to do is install the NeuralStyle TF library. Again, this is using Git and some other things. You don't need to know what you're doing here. Just hit Shift Return to run the code. What this is doing is it's installing software on the server backend. This usually takes a handful of seconds. You'll see it's downloading some things. Again, unless you see a bright red warning message here, you're probably good. We're also going to be downloading a model. So remember how I said that style transfer is a pre-trained model? You're going to be downloading some stuff here. Now, while this downloads, I'm going to come over here to the file section, hit refresh. And you'll see now I have a new folder here. It says NeuralStyle TF. And if I open this, you'll see there's a bunch of different things in here. But the most important things that we want to look at are image input and video input. Or sorry, not video input, styles. So image input and styles. I'm not going to go over video style transfer. I have a video about that if you're really interested. You can't really do it on Colab, so I'm mostly going to work with static images for this. So first thing I want to do is I want to, let's run through here. So next thing I need to do is let's make sure we're in the right folder. So I just want to run this command, and I want to make sure that I see this as a response. So I'm going to do this. And I got the correct folder match. So that means I'm in the right place. So now it's time to run this. So here's the example of how to run a very basic style transfer command. So you'll see here that you are running Python, and then you're pointing it at this script, and then you want to say here's the location of my content image, and here's the name of my style image. And these match up to these folders here. So you'll see if I go to content image and I go to image input, you'll see lion.jpg is in here. So content image will only ever look for files inside of image input. Style images will only look for images inside of style. Now, if I were to run this is probably going to take about 5 minutes to run. I'm going to add a couple small little things to make sure it runs quicker. So I'm going to change the size of this, and I'm going to change the iterations to 300. And I'm going to run this. So basically, again, you click in here and you hit Shift Return. And this is going to take about a minute to run. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is I have a folder here of images that I want to actually make myself. So I'm going to come over here. So these are just a bunch of texture images I've downloaded from the internet. So I'm going to grab these as textures, and I'm going to put these into the styles folder. And it's important to know that when you run this, when you upload this, these will, like, basically when you stop your Colab, when your machine shuts off, you're going to have to re-upload those to do it again the next time. Anytime your machine shuts off, you will lose all of the work that you have. So it's very important to remember what you've uploaded, what you saved. If there are images that you need to bring down, you should download those before your machine shuts off. Okay, so I'm just going to grab this image because this is the image I want to work with as an input for my content. Upload that as well. And you'll see here that while this was running, this image finished. And it finished in 30 seconds, which is pretty fast. Now, it's a small image, so that's probably why it didn't take very long. I'm going to come over here, I'm going to come to image output, and I'm going to open this folder, and you'll see in here there's a folder called 300. That happens to be because I used a max iterations of 300. And if you open this, you'll see in here you have content, image output, and style 0. So normally what I would do is I would actually just download this. So you can download this image by clicking, control clicking on this and then hitting download. And you can come here and say show in Finder. You can open that, and you'll see we've now combined a lion and Kandinsky and created a lion in the Kandinsky style. Now, if we go down here, this is a way for you to output your images. I generally don't like this. It's just a little bit slower. I find that I can just download the image and look at it really quickly if I want to. But if you do want to look at it live in this web page, here's the way to do it. You want to make sure that your folders and names match up. So I noticed here that this needs to be 300, this needs to be 300, This needs to be 300. One way to do this is you can actually just grab the copy path from here, and you could just paste this in. So I could do this, and that would be the same thing. If you understand local, like sort of different file names, that sort of thing, this is the same path. It's just because you're already in this folder that it knows to start there. So if I run this, hit Shift Return, you'll see it output exactly what I started with. So this is the content image I started with. This is the style image I started with, and here's the combined version. And that's great. Like, we could basically work off this like the entire time. So maybe actually let's do that. So let me do this. Let me come over here and let's change out our content image and our style image. So I know that this was the content image I wanted, so I'm just going to copy the path here, and I'm going to paste this in. And I know that I can remove everything from here. So I just have the name here now, although that space might be a problem. Let's see. Actually, you know what? That is going to be a problem. I'm going to rename this. One thing you have to know is that you shouldn't have spaces in your file names, so I'm just going to remove that space there, and I'm going to remove that here. And then I want a style image. Let's see. Let me look at my folder and see what style image I would like to use. Let's try this one. So I'm going to copy the name of this, and remember, it's already uploaded. It's already here. So I'm going to paste this into my style image. And now this is basically all I need to create my own images. There's a bunch of other options, but if I want to just play with this, this is all I need to do. So now edit these two. I can go back to the cell, and I can hit Shift Return, and this is going to run again. And I got an error message. What did I get? It probably can't accept. It cannot accept parentheses. That's something I didn't know. So let's just delete this here, and let's rename this over here. This is why I'm doing it live, so you can see that I screw up all the time too. So now rename that, and I'm going to run this again. So while this is running, let me just check to see my chat window, see what's going on here. I could do a style transfer based on my cat. She won't sit still long enough for me to actually take a photograph of her. So we'll try that again. Maybe we'll try that for next week. I'll do something with my cat. How about that? That sounds pretty cool. Okay, so this just ran, and it actually only took 20 seconds this time, so it was even faster. I don't know why that is. It could be any number of reasons, but that's cool. It's great. One thing you'll notice is that with this particular command, it actually just overwrote my current files. So if you want to do this, just using this method, make sure you save your images as you're going through it. That's going to be pretty helpful. So there are other ways, and I'll show you an option here really quickly that allows you to change the file name or to just name your files. But just so you know, you can also just sort of download them as you produce them. So let's open this up and see what happened. That's pretty cool. That is maybe not what I expected it to look like, but that is a really interesting image. And what did it combine? So if we come back down here and we go and we run these images and we run this command again, so it's worth remembering that every time you run a command, you're running it essentially in order. So you come up here, you can run this command, then you come back here and you run this command. You'll see right now, like, this is not updated live, right? Because I haven't run this command yet. So if I run this again, it's going to change with what my current images are. So here we'll see, this is the image I used as input. You'll see that it sort of cropped the style image, and that's because your two images have to always match up size-wise, and this library just chooses to crop into whatever image you uploaded. And then here's the combined. So pretty interesting. This is already pretty cool. But let's say I want to do more with this. So one thing I might want to do is, let's copy this. I'm just going to take this whole command and copy it. Let me go back to my table of contents. So I'll see that I have some options here. So I have options around output size, iterations, folder naming, doing multiple style images, style scale, and original colors, content and style weights, texture synthesis. So you might not know what a lot of these mean, but let's just click in one of these and just sort of see. So let's see original colors. So another interesting feature of this library is the ability to use the color from the content image and only take the texture and not the color from the style image. So to do this, you pass the original colors argument. Unlike our other arguments, you need to pass in parameters. You just pass in original colors. Okay, so if I want to try this, there's two ways I could try this. One is I could actually just like paste this line in here into this command, and I would overwrite that. I don't really want to do that for this example, so I'm going to undo that. And if you hover between two cells, or you come up here and you hit plus code or plus text, you can add a new cell or add a new text cell. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add a code cell above this, and I'm going to paste in my command. And then it says I can just add original colors to the end of this. So let's just do that. So I'm going to add in original colors. I'm going to add this to the end of the command, and then I'm just going to hit shift return and run it. This is going to run for a little bit. What's funny is that this size and with this many iterations, it probably is actually faster to run the process than it is to actually set up the process. So what you're seeing here is it's actually installing a bunch, or it's not necessarily installing, but it's actually setting up your whole network, and then it ran. And it ran quicker than it did to actually download this stuff. So I go back over to files. So again, because I haven't set up anything new, it's just going to overwrite my image. So I'm going to download this again. And I'm going to show in Finder. And now I have an image that has the colors from my style image, or from my content image, and the textures from my style. So if I compare these two, you'll see this one has more color. This one keeps the old colors. So that's pretty cool. I can now do stuff where I'm almost just adding texture to an image and not adding color or other things to it. Pretty interesting, worth playing with. So let's look at a couple other options here. I think in about 5 minutes I'll stop and like start taking questions from folks. So if you have questions, please put them in here. One of the things that I really like to play with is style scale. This is like my favorite feature of this library, and actually is something that I built custom for this library. So if you go to style scale, let's read this. So the default, so again, if we come back up to here, and remember this is one long page, so we can look at pieces individually. Scroll all the way back up to the top and look at, is it this one? This one. Yeah. So if you look, this image is cropped in. If I actually come back here and I look at the original, you'll see that this image actually has a lot more texture in it, and it's a lot bigger. So maybe there's a way that I can actually bring in more of that texture into the style scale. So let's look at how to do style scale. So it's the same command, max iterations, max size, and there's a command called style scale. So let's actually just take this and let's add a code cell above here, and let's paste in my command. Uh-oh, lost it, but I can come back up here and find it. So actually, let me just jump up here to a basic style transfer. And here's my command, copy, come back down to style scale, paste this in. And then style scale takes an option between, it looks like what was called a float number. So the way style scale works is the smaller the scale is, the smaller the style image is, which means you might get more of the texture in it. So I'm just going to take the 0.5. This tends to be how I work, is I start with big jumps at first, and then I like scale it down from there. I'm going to paste this in, and let's run this command. And while I do that, I'm going to come back up here, and I'm going to grab this command because I want to show it after my style scale. So let's add a new line of a new code cell here. So this just finished. So let's add a new code cell here, and let's paste that command back in. Now remember, because I keep renaming my files, it just is overwriting the previous example. So if I run this again, I'll now see what the new setup is. And you'll see now, if you recall, that this image now shows, you see more of that texture. And if you also look at the actual output of the image, you'll see that it's now sort of, it's got more detail, it's got finer details. And the question is, like, do I like this, do I not like this? This is where the artistic eye comes into play, right? Like, how do I want to play with this thing? What do I see as what's good here? That sort of thing. So it's worth investigating and playing with, like, how does this actually work? Okay, so I've now made an image. These are not maybe my favorite images. One of the things you have to know is that the size of your image really matters a lot in what you're doing. So let's actually look at how to change the output size. So I'm going to actually come up here and I'm going to grab this again. I'm just going to copy this command, and let's look at output size. And you'll see here that it's dependent on max size. So let's add a cell above this. And let me just see what the max size of this particular image is. It is 512 by 512. So I really don't want to make it any bigger than that. So let's just look at using 512. So it turns out I need to change the max size, which I'd previously set to be smaller. Now this is going to take a little bit longer to run, but it is, I want to see what it looks like with these same settings at a larger size. So let's just put in 512. I'm going to run this. I think it'll probably take about a minute. So this will be the last thing that I do for this demo, and then we'll take some questions. So feel free to post questions about other things. There are a ton of other options in here, and I have some other videos that actually the video that that is linked to in the slide deck will also show you some other examples. But let me just show you that there are ways to do. You can do things with multiple different images, so you can combine multiple styles, which is a really cool feature. I definitely recommend checking out that one. You can mess with weights, style scale we talked about. So basically, like with multiple styles, you could say I want one that is more Starry Night and one more Kandinsky, like these sort of things. And there's also a thing called texture synthesis, which I don't know if I have an image of, but it says like just produce some textures and no content image, which again is also pretty interesting. Iterations is something to play with. That determines how long it runs for, and the longer it runs, you might get slightly different style outputs from those things. And then folder naming, which is important for you if you're going to turn this into a production tool. Let's take a look and see if this one has finished running. Looks like it has. So it took about a minute. So it was a little bit longer, about double the time. And let's just come in here and let's go to, make sure we didn't change our names here at all. We did not. So I'm going to come back up here and grab this copy, and let's look and see what happened. All right, so the first thing you notice is that my images are much bigger. I personally think you see more detail and other things in here. So one of the nice things is just like having this as an option is really, really helpful. So you'll see our content image is bigger. One thing you'll notice with the style image is that now it's also sort of reflecting. That's just a way to manage the fact that like the style image might not have been big enough to actually fit 512 by 512. So this allows me to do a little bit more with that texture. And then you'll see like here's what I produced. So if I were to do this at say 1200 pixels or something larger, you would actually see that like you would get more and more detail, and you might actually be able to make out more of this image, which is really cool and really helpful. So I think with this, like we've got maybe 5 minutes left for me to take questions. I'm going to stop here for this live stream, just in showing stuff. And if you have more questions, please jump in my Slack channel or drop some comments in the YouTube, and I'll like sort of like, maybe I'll do another video where I show some more advanced features of this thing. Maybe I'll do it in the next live stream. I don't know. I kind of want to jump to like trying some other libraries in the next live stream, but let me know what you think, and let me know what you're interested in. So first off, thanks. I'm going to field some questions now, and I'll probably wrap up in about 5 minutes. Okay, cool. So Just a Poor had a question of, I was wondering if you use the same images and setting in the code, will you always have the same image output? There is actually a little bit of randomness in these two, in this particular model, so it actually will change a little bit. It won't change a lot, but I would actually recommend is playing more with the different options, so maybe playing with your style scale or playing with iterations. So actually, Dev asks, what is an iteration? So the difference between a higher and a lower one is essentially like how long it takes to run. So I think it's really helpful if you almost think about it like baking, right? If you run it for 100 iterations, that might be undercooking something, in which case it might be a little mushy or something. If you over bake it, say for 1,000 iterations or 2,000 iterations, it might actually like be a little crisp. And that's my analogy. The actual iterations, I tend to stick around 500 almost all the time. For this example, I used 300 because I knew I had a short amount of time to demo some stuff. So I think it's like pretty helpful to just play with those iterations. And the way to play with them is just to come back up here and just change the number of iterations right here. So, I mean, I would say don't go any higher than 1200. Any higher than that, and you're just spending a lot of time like letting it cook, but it's like pretty much already done. I generally stick between 300 and 600, but again, I would just actually export out a bunch of different options. When you run this, which I'll do really quickly, it's actually going to add a new folder here, so you'll actually be able to compare your iterations, and you can also use that sample code above to try to play with stuff if you want to. Let's see what other questions were here. So Ashkan asks, can you mix two styles? You can mix two styles. There's an example of this in this collab. I ran out of time to really show it, but I definitely want to do it and show some things before. Definitely take a look at that and play with it. Most of my work actually does mix styles because it's more fun. It also, like, to talk about it a little bit, like, it takes you away from feeling like you're just using other people's materials and you're actually mixing and matching your own things. So it's really helpful to think about it that way. So there definitely are examples in here. You can mix like many styles. You can mix up to like 5 or 6 styles, and actually there might not actually be a limit. So definitely check that out and play with it and see what you like. And if you make cool stuff, like, please share it. You can @ me on either Instagram or on Twitter, or like drop it in my Slack channel, and I'd love to see what people make with it. Xandor asks, I've used some collabs before and always get tripped up on what are the scale of different parameters. Some require numbers from 0.0 to 1.0, and others are 1000s. Yeah, this is a great question. This is just like a general thing you have to sort of learn about different different libraries in general. So one of the things that I try to do, and I might not have done the best here, is that every time I mention a different output, I sort of tell you what it expects. So in this case, for output size, use a integer, which is just a number from 0 to whatever, and that represents pixels, right? So you can't have a half pixel, so you wouldn't put 1.5 in there. That just wouldn't work. In the case of scale, so scale is from, if you think about it like percentages, 1.0 is the same scale that it's been uploaded at. 0.5 is half the scale, those sort of things. I generally try to, where I can, like put in notes about like what it expects. If I miss something, you can always just ask me either on Slack or on Twitter or here, and I'm happy to sort of point out like how you actually would figure that out. A lot of these also have, this particular one doesn't have a link to it, but basically the GitHub repo for this is, I think I saw someone ask about this. The GitHub repo is this, so you could actually like copy and paste this in here as well. And usually the GitHub repo will also tell you what it expects as an input. So if I come down here to inputs, you'll see it sort of tells you what the inputs are. Generally, if something has an input of 1.0 or a float number, you can probably try to put in a bunch of different floats and you might get an error message, but in general it'll kind of work. A lot of my role when I like learn a new model is just like play with these numbers and see what happens. So you can always read the notes here and try to figure it out. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it isn't. Some of these machine learning models are not as well commented as I would like, but it does happen. Okay, so another question around randomness. So again, it's like not every machine learning model does use randomness, and most of them are coded in a different way. So there's different ways to do that. Again, I would really just look at like each individual model and just sort of see. So I think ESRGAN, I think is deterministic, which means there is no randomness in its model. I don't know enough about deep privacy to say for sure. So usually there is a randomness variable in a lot of things, but there isn't always. And my recommendation would be, if you're not sure, is to like look inside of the GitHub repo and see what they say. Ryan asks, is there a way to export multiple variations with Colab without doing it one at a time? Yes, there is, depending on the library. So I think what he's saying is I would like to make an animation afterward. So let's say you want to animate between scales. You could do that. You would probably have to run the lines of code one at a time. Or if you want to animate between iterations, you could do that as well. In general, the way to, there's 2 ways that you can export stuff from multiple images from Colab. The first is to run a zip command. So you can basically zip up a folder, and then you could download that folder. I don't have an example of that here, but essentially what it would be is you would, let me just add a line of code randomly here, and you would just say zip, and then you would give it what you want the zip name to be. So let's just say zipped file.zip, and then you want to give it a folder. And I never remember, I think it's like, is it -R for recursive? Maybe. I'll have to look up the actual command, but you could do that. The other way is you can actually connect your Google Drive account to this, and then you can actually copy images from here into Google Drive. That might be faster for a lot of people. I happen to have like a 2 terabyte Google Drive, and it takes forever to connect. So I generally, if I'm doing something fast like this, I might just download the images by hand or run the zip command. And usually the way I find out what the zip command is, I could just like Google zip Linux, and it'll tell me what the command is. Literally, this is what I do half the time. Zip commands. Let me see if it tells me how to. So you use the recursive function. So if I just come back over here and hit this should work. And then if I refresh the page here, yep, there's a zip file. So that's probably the fastest way. You can look if you Google this, you can look into it and learn a little bit more. All right, I'm just about at time. So if you have other questions, please feel free to ask me questions. Either drop them in the I can never remember it, the comments of this video, or join my Slack channel and ask me there. I'm always happy to help out folks in my Slack channel, and you can also see whether people are working on those sort of things. So one shout out again is, like, if you do want, I have a newsletter you can sign up for. That's where I announce all my classes. So if you're interested in taking a class with me, keep an eye on that. I'm also on Instagram, Twitter, wherever you want. Yeah, it's been really fun. If you want to see more of this, let me know. If there are certain things you're really interested in, I'd be happy to show things off. So with that, I'm going to sign